Hey up and welcome to the Temple of Blair. This is a conversation with Rick Ernst. Now, Rick's is a name that you should be familiar with as he produced the documentary Get Thrashed from around 2006-2007, still available online. We discuss Rick's long career in the music or the television arm of the music industry with stints at MTV, on Headbanger's Ball, 120 Minutes, and then eventually ending up at Roadrunner Records as the head of video production. Now, video as a mechanism for labels to promote their shtick isn't something I've come across yet. It's not a rabbit hole I've jumped down, so I was very, very eager to do so with Rick, and this is a very free-form conversation to support that agenda. So I'm a little bit clippy in this episode. Rick had the distinct honor of breaking in the new Temple of Blair production office, and I'm still realigning the kinks in the sound and things like that. I'm sure he'll get over it. Anyway, thanks to Rick for his time. 1, 2, fuck shit up. I was gonna say, get Thrashed as an artifact of a documentary, like in terms of what it looked at and what it documented. Really, obviously, it's geographically sound. It's geographically specific. It's also genre specific. But since then, since 2007, like literally as that was coming out, there's been like a revival since then, hasn't there?
There has. It's amazing that all those thrash bands, came back bigger and stronger, and with some albums that are, classics in their own right, along with a whole new wave of kids that grew up on that stuff. So, there definitely is a possibility that you could do a sequel to it. The rebirth of thrash metal. I don't know if if I would ever go down that road, just because Get Thrashed to me was just such a pivotal moment in time and sort of encapsulated that thrash metal moment. And it ended on such a great note with these bands starting to come back.
Yeah.
That I don't know if I would be able to do any justice to the first Get Thrashed with the second one that kind of told a story but evolved. I think the story really would be picking up where thrash metal left off, in 1990, 1991, 92, and death metal sort of picked up the torch and became the next biggest and heaviest thing. And that's actually, when we're talking about Roadrunner Records, that's actually where I discovered Roadrunner, pretty much with Sepultura, Obituary, and where death metal sort of took the mantle from thrash as the heaviest music on the block.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's because now we're in the sort of the age of oversaturation. There's always something for everyone. And I just think we still call Evil, we still call Municipal Waste, we still call Power Trip, we call it Thrash Revival, we still call it Thrash Revival. At some point, it's just thrash. That's the essence of the question, right? Has that era sort of aged to a point where it's noteworthy to talk about? I think so, in a way.
Yeah, like I said, I just don't know how I would top.
Yeah.
What those bands did. So, like you said, at a certain point, thrash metal becomes not a revival; it becomes a genre that's everlasting and it's here. And there are bands that play it, and there are bands that pioneered it. So, I would leave that to, I think, probably somebody else to take a crack at the new wave of thrash metal bands and see if they could take a stab at it. I think I've laid my marker down with the first Get Thrashed, and I don't think I could top it with a part 2.
I won't pressure you, but I just thought it's interesting how it's been like 14 odd years and there's so much that's happened. But to me, it's like it almost lives and dies by Municipal Waste's Art of Partying. That to me is like the ultimate fucking 21st century thrash album to me.
Absolutely.
There's loads of other ones out there, like Nightmare Logic is really fucking crushing as well. But anyway, we're going to talk about Roadrunner. Normally I usually go to meticulous detail to prep interviewees, and I try and find out everything and all this stuff. But with yourself, because it's a new academic rabbit hole to jump down, video isn't necessarily something that I am too overly familiar with. Obviously, I watched Kerrang TV in the UK back in the day, and that was kind of it. I don't really watch videos that much now. I just watch the new Trivium one, and that's only because it's the only way you can listen to the song at the minute. Well, actually, I could have gone on Spotify, but I wanted something on this screen while I was playing games on that screen.
Sure.
But but it's I always give a massive shit when it comes to Roadrunner about how they place themselves, because one thing that you'll sometimes hear among these sort of conversations are, oh yeah, there's Casey's fingerprint, there's a Roadrunner fingerprint in almost every market, even to the point where I went through every Kerrang magazine and saw, all right, there's a trend here. Kerrang are typically giving Roadrunner either a half page, like a half column or a full column. Sorry, 2 half columns or a full column, depending on what's happening per week. There's an arrangement there by which if you're flipping through Kerrang, you're going to see Roadrunner every fucking week. Similarly, when I was talking to Amy Sciaretta, we're talking about the radio and how they make sure all the diehard metal radio stations got all the heavy shit first, make sure the underground, the cult side was like always satisfied with their relationship with Roadrunner. But I know fuck all about video. And the world of video, because UK video versus US video, especially when we talk about MTV and VH1, they are dramatically different. And I was speaking to a guy from TMF, the Dutch MTV, wildly different. So, as I said at the start, I usually prep people, but I think I need a meander into this world. I need to sort of I need to be handheld. I need to do a bit of sleepwalking. I need to feel around a bit. So I've given you like rough ideas of what I think is important. So bear with me if it feels like completely off the wall.
Oh, no worries. I'll do my best to answer the questions. I was there for the last, Roadrunner's still going, but I think the last great run that they had was, was up until, Monty and a few others were let go, so I was there for that last section of it. I think we spoke earlier or, off the record about my 3 phases of Roadrunner. My first one was as a fan with Sepultura, Obituary, and bands like that. That's when I discovered them, sort of like in the early 90s. Before then, I was into Thrash, and Roadrunner wasn't really known as a thrash label, Atrophy being the one I remember most. But, there were other labels releasing thrash metal albums. So it wasn't until the 90s that I got into Roadrunner as a fan. I went to work at MTV as a producer, and I started working with the folks and the bands at Roadrunner. So that was sort of phase 2, working with them as I was producing at MTV, Headbangers Ball, and other shows. And then, of course, the third one, I ended up working at Roadrunner from about 2008 to 2013, 2012 or so, as the director of video production, managing videos and, digital shorts and documentaries and all sorts of stuff. So I was there sort of the beginning as a fan, and then working with the bands, and then working at the label itself. So
you had a front seat to it becoming incredibly viable when in your phase 1, it was still very much independent outlier music, very sort of like groundbreaking stuff for heavy people. Then in your phase 2, as you're working at MTV, you're seeing it become like a monster with Slipknot and Nickelback and things like that. And in your phase 3, it's an established beast. It's probably one of the bigger independents, if not the biggest. I don't know about like in the wider world, but certainly in the metal world. So I think there's certainly some things we can bounce off of and some valuable observations we can make.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Let's start with phase 2 then, because producing Headbangers Ball at MTV, this I have zero experience of. I know the UK had an MTV Headbangers Ball. I know it was quite effective, and they had a great relationship with Roadrunner, because I know there was Vanessa Warwick, who did a lot of work with a lot of the bands, basically. And I've heard incidentally through different interviews that she'd like go to bat for them a lot of the time. Now I know Dino has a lot of reverence for her and things like that. So how powerful I'm trying to phrase this in a Roadrunner label context. How powerful a tool is Headbangers Ball to a label like Roadrunner?
Well, when I first started at MTV, I was an intern on the first Headbangers Ball, and then eventually I became a producer on the Headbangers Ball that Jamie Josta hosted, sort of like 5-6 years later. Yeah. But all throughout, it was obvious that the metal bands, heavier bands, they all wanted to be on Headbangers Ball. The metal fans would give MTV crap because they didn't play the kind of music that we all liked, except for that 2 hours in the middle of the night. So, there definitely was like an animosity from metal fans towards the show, but, in terms of fans, most of us would watch, we would just cross our fingers that we'd get a glimpse of a Voivod video or a COC video. And it was important. Listen, it did make a difference in terms of, visibility. Maybe the ultimate, hardcore metalhead knew who CLC was and Voivod, and certainly they did. But to reach that next level in terms of album sales, you needed to do something to get beyond just the hardcore fan. You need to get a hold of the more mainstream fan. And the first place to do that was MTV and Headbangers Ball, because you had people that were watching the mainstream rock stuff, and they were also getting exposed to heavier stuff. And I think it was important. And you look at Metallica, who in the United States had never released a video, and Master of Puppets, they were big, but they were opening for Ozzy Osbourne on an arena tour. Mm-hmm. The next album comes out, and Justice for All, they released their first video ever for one. MTV, especially Headbangers Ball, is playing it every week. And then all of a sudden, Metallica's headlining arenas, sold out nights, multiple nights in New York. So it definitely made a difference.
I guess, what were the other options for the average metalhead in those days? Was there any other sort of like bespoke metal show that wasn't like a cable access or a local show?
That's it. There really wasn't. There was nothing else. It's hard to imagine a time before YouTube and social media and instant access to all this stuff. But at the time, there was no other alternative. There were a few public access stations in New York. There used to be one called U68, the Power Hour. You could barely get it. And once again, it was in the middle of the night, and it was just for a small audience in New York. So it was very important. Headbangers Ball, even though it was on late at night, once a week, and it was very difficult to find that one video, needle in a haystack type of thing. It was important because the fans you wanted to reach were usually watching that show.
This is the thing, isn't it? I mean, there's the story of Guns N' Roses, isn't there? So there's Appetite for Destruction comes out in 87 to not much fanfare, but someone, I don't know if it is the UK Headbangers Ball, plays Welcome to the Jungle at like 6 a.m. on one of their shows, like somewhere in the UK. And that starts the fire that eventually turns into what it did. It's something, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's a lot to be said. I mentioned Metallica, but there's example after example of how, MTV, specifically Headbangers Ball, was influential in helping, a band, build and grow. In my time as an intern on the first Headbangers Ball, I can think of like Prong and COC and Life of Agony, and these are bands that I knew of. But like to see them on Headbangers Ball, and to see them going from the small clubs like Lemoore in New York to playing like, the Ritz in New York City and bigger places, and seeing them grow, I don't think that happens without Headbangers Ball and being played on that show. Again, because there was nowhere else. There was one other place. It also was MTV. It was a show called Beavis and Butthead. And there's a famous story about White Zombie, actually, right? Before Rob Zombie, there was White Zombie. And they played Thunder Kiss 65. And from obscurity to, everybody knew who White Zombie was. And that's another example of how, MTV was important. A lot of us don't want to admit it, and the hardcore metal fans, I think, we knew about this music and we didn't need the help from Headbangers Ball. But again, to reach that next level beyond the hardcore fan, you needed some help, and Headbangers Ball was that help.
I think it's really important in the process. I hate sort of like when we have to reflect and go, it's not like fucking these days, but we have to peel back one onion layer and sort of understand that we all like to think. People around the world like to think, but we had no idea that we liked to think until we found the one campfire. And we all gathered around that one campfire and got that little bit cozy and warm around that one thing. And that's the feeling that I don't know if it's me getting older or it's just like the way that information is sort of disseminated these days. I don't think that feeling comes around as much anymore. But then again, I might just be getting old. But I think that's the clincher here, isn't it? That's what everyone was grabbing onto. And that's why it was important. So what year are we at here when you're an intern?
I was an intern there in 93. And then I was working for them for a brief moment in like 94. Mm-hmm. So, and then it quickly, the show was canceled as a new wave of music was coming in. Mm-hmm. And it was ironic that sort of like the last breath of MTV Headbangers Ball was introducing bands like Soundgarden and Nirvana, Faith No More. And then, certainly within a year, the show was, basically renamed, rebranded, and it was more of an alternative kind of show, only to reappear years later as Headbangers Ball.
Yeah, that's like that's the corporate sort of like ebbs and flows, isn't it? That's the
Absolutely,
migration of
yeah.
interests. So when you're interning that 93, 94, key Roadrunner years, very key.
Yeah.
Bloody Kisses, Runs Red. Um, did you have any visibility or did you have any knowledge of how labels would try and leverage that tool that is Headbanger's Ball? Would they try and I don't know how do I phrase it in a diplomatically sound way? How would they try and get on? What would they try and do? Would they try and just offer money and go get fucking Typo Negative on there, 500 grand? Oh no, we've got Metallica on for 600 grand. Fuck off! It's gonna be 700. You know.
Listen, to the best of my knowledge, working at MTV, Roadrunner was, or any label really, of that sort of indie genre, and that had metal bands as their prominent, focus. None of them had the money to offer MTV anything substantial. Really, it boiled down to the people who programmed Headbangers Ball, looking at album sales, very important album sales, and also, just liking the music. A lot of people gave Ricky Rackman was the host of Headbangers Ball while I was there, and a lot of people gave him flack for some of the videos that they played. He never really had a voice in this, so it never was him. It was the people in the programming department. So it was really about album sales. If the album was doing well, then they would take a look. If they liked the song, if they liked the video, and certainly there was a relationship. With like Jonas. Jonas was probably the guy, and even back then, some of the other folks having a relationship with the MTV programming department was very helpful to getting the video on the air. But really, I think it boiled down to sales and whether the programming people at MTV believed in the band. And certainly with a band like Typo Negative and Sepultura, they did, because they were played frequently.
It took a while with Typo, as I understand it.
Yes, it did. It did. I wish I could give you more information, but I just know the basics of how it works. And, I was always, as a fan and as an intern, so excited to see that we were playing Sepultura and Typo Negative, and to see the evolution and the show just get heavier and heavier. It's because it really was a reflection of what was going on in music. I'm not sure that MTV had any influence over, breaking, a new genre of death metal, for instance. I just think that it became popular enough that it was on the radar for the people who programmed the show. And, that's when they started playing, those bands.
No, I'm going to make a note to actually just go back and look at some Headbangers Ball, like in earnest, as opposed to like the clips that the algorithm sends me to, because I think it's, how do I articulate this without sounding fucking boring? Well, it's too late for that. It is clearly important. There's clearly some milestone. If this is the one campfire everyone's coming around, and it's been determined by the same things that typically determine radio play and print, which is relationships, momentum, and these other like legs that make a band stand on, then I should be looking at Headbangers Ball for these isolated cool incidents where, let's say, I'm not gonna go, and then they played Refuse Resist, and then the next week KSAD sold 10,000 more. It's not going to be like that, but I think it's worth me having a look and seeing what stuck or what seemed to capture their interest from those days. There we go. I made a note to do that at some point. So where do you move on from in terms of after interning it?
Yeah, I was at MTV, interning on Headbangers Ball, and I wound up working on other shows there. I worked on 120 Minutes, which was sort of like the alternative music show, also airing late at night. But they certainly played, a lot of bands, Blink 182 before anybody knew who Blink 182 was. That was another show that was groundbreaking in the sense it found all these new bands and played them, and then so many of them went on to become huge, really big bands. Essentially, if you think of like the Warped Tour, like so many of those bands got their start early on 120 Minutes, along with some of the, bands like The Cure and the Smiths that were before my time on the show, but that's sort of the where all that came from in that show. But after that, I was at MTV for a while, and it wasn't until, I don't know, like 10 years later or so that they brought Headbangers Ball back. They brought it back with Jamie Josta from Hatebreed hosting the show. And by that time, I was, fortunate enough to climb the ladder, and I was the supervising producer on the show. And, that was a whole nother experience. A lot of fun going from intern to supervising producer, and, actually being able to get your picture with Tony Iommi and Rob Halford and not fear that you'll get fired. The intern's taking pictures with all the bands again. Get it out of here. At that point, they were playing very heavy stuff. Real Headbangers was very heavy, and it was almost the opposite effect. If that, you had a melodic song and a pop song, it was almost a little bit more difficult to get on the show at that point, because they were just really. And it was a great show, but it was heavy stuff.
I wonder if there's a link here between the rise of emo, because I think that this era is it 2006 when Jamie's doing it? When he starts? So this is the height of emo. So maybe it's been brought in as like an alternative to this sort of what is effectively heavy pop. Because that's what emo kind of was. It was topping Billboard, and it was doing really sort of effective market things. So maybe metal had its place as a market outlier there again, as far as MTV was concerned, perhaps.
Yeah, and certainly Jamie, Josta brought a level of credibility that really, could not be touched. And once again, he wasn't really involved in the programming, but I think at that point everybody realized that Jamie, being Jamie, singer of Hatebreed, that he brings a certain value, and certainly he's in the scene and new bands and new music, and he would suggest stuff, and he certainly had a little bit more input into what was being played. But once again, it really wasn't the host programming the show.
Let's define the programmer's role in this then, because I need to know who's picking up. I need to know who are the people that have got their ears to the ground. So the programmers literally effectively the A&R people of TV, or is that am I trying to fit a round peg into a square hole?
That's sort of correct. I mean, the programmers, were their job was to essentially find the next big thing, and they would do that by going to shows and seeing a packed house or an enthusiastic crowd or a band that was just amazing, and then comparing that to album sales and just using that information to see what's coming down the pipe, what's the next big thing, as well as what's huge right now. It was a combination of all of that stuff. And again, I think the MTV programming folks also had a small level of the ability to pick what they liked. I don't think if a band sold 4 albums last week that they were going to be on the show, but I think there was some ability for them to pick stuff they like. But mainly their job was to look at the next big thing, look at album sales, look at how the band was doing on the road, and also listen what label they were on, and how well that label works with MTV.
Yeah. I'm probably overstepping from your role as intern and the way to producing and whatnot. But Roadrunner's relationship with MTV must have been somewhat credible for a number of reasons. One, there's the MTV compilations in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
There's actually, let's ask this: were you cognizant of what Roadrunner was doing in that period while you were at MTV? Because MTV is fucking between you interning and producing, there's a massive seismic shift in what they were producing. It was Beavis and Butthead through to the fucking Osbournes, like a reality TV core. MTV2 comes in, Zane Lowe alienates me on a personal level, and then we move into the Headbangers Ball world. The Roadrunner's got this, especially in the late 90s. The way I perceive it is we've got flagship acts doing flagship things, and then the label underneath those flagship acts are doing really crazy things, like they're going into rap and they're doing some indie stuff, and they've got some Britpop things going along and things like that. Were you cognizant of this while you were there, or as a metalhead?
Absolutely. Part of that was as a fan. There was a whole era from 95 to 2003 where metal was just kind of it was a dirty word, right? Not only on MTV, but on radio, everywhere. It was tough for metal bands for those 8 years. And those 8 years I was at MTV, and I was, behind the scenes saying, you guys got to play this, you should play this, you should play this. And if they weren't, I was playing it in the office. or I was calling up, somebody at Roadrunner, to go see a show, to check out Slipknot, to see Slipknot at the Limelight, the small club in New York City before they were big, to have Fear Factory, to go to bat for Fear Factory and get them to play Spring Break, down in Cancun amidst all the other shows MTV was doing, which you probably can imagine what they were, game shows and drinking shows and TNA, and we've got Fear Factory up on stage. Still my proudest moment at MTV to get Fear Factory on Spring Break. Absolutely. I was absolutely, Machine. I remember Machine Head albums being sent to me. Roadrunner would send me stuff, always thank them for that. And, I still have every Machine Head album. And, a lot of that was because Roadrunner was sending me stuff, So I was absolutely in tune very specifically with what Roadrunner was doing, because I had become friends with those guys that worked there. And, they sort of, they wanted me to hear what they were doing. And I wanted to hear what they were doing because I was a fan.
Who was your main point of contact?
Aaliyah Choa. Aaliyah was in marketing, and also Corey Brennan.
Yeah.
Corey Brennan now manages Slipknot and other bands. But, back then he worked at Roadrunner. And those were my two main contacts. Jen Miola. Also, so those are really the three people I think back on, and those are the three contacts. They were all marketing, product management folks.
Yeah, okay.
So they were more than happy to send me CDs and put me on the list to go see the bands. And I certainly at MTV was like, I'll take free music. I'll take a free ticket.
So tell me about getting Fear Factory onto Spring Break then, because you mentioned that it was at the height of we'll call it the TNA era. Not to disparage your colleagues or your workplace, but they had a role. It
is what it is. And Spring Break once a year, usually it was in Florida, or the year we were down with Fear Factory was in Cancun. And, I don't know, I had been close with the folks at Roadrunner, and specifically, believe it was Aaliyah Choa that I was talking to about Fear Factory or one of the other bands playing Spring Break. We also talked about Slipknot. And the genesis is that WCW, professional wrestling, was huge. So, my bosses, knowing that I was a huge wrestling fan, came to me and they said, what could we do to get wrestlers down to Spring Break? So I came up with this crazy concept that what if we had a battle royal? And battle royal is essentially where a bunch of guys are in the ring, they fight each other, and they attempt to throw each other over the top rope, and the last one left is the winner. So I said, what if we get a bunch of WCW guys to do a battle royal? But it's not a normal battle royal because we need music. What if the band is playing music right next to the ring and the band just keeps playing until the last guy is left? So they get to play how many songs, and we get to see wrestling and we get to see a performance. Of course, this band can't be like a pop band. It can't be the Backstreet Boys. It has to be somebody heavy, really heavy. And the label that has the coolest, heaviest bands is Roadrunner. So, luckily I got a connection there. I'll call up and see what we can do. And, we made it happen with Fear Factory. And it was, it was a miracle that it happened, but still a moment that I'm so proud of.
Is this when you're on 120 minutes? Is that your main role at this stage?
Yeah, at this point, I think it was 120 minutes, but also they had put me on different special and different shows and stuff. So that's why I jumped off of 120 minutes and was working on this Spring Break special.
This is why it's important to talk to people like you to sort of break the mold of my own sort of perception of these things, because I regard that era and that kind of music in the 120 minutes sort of Warped Tour stuff. I call that the Tony Hawk window, where Tony Hawk's Pro Skater comes out, and that sort of informs everyone's tastes for the next few years, and still does to this day in a big way. But when Slipknot land then, because Slipknot ends up becoming chart toppers, platinum sales, all the thing, they end up being MTV viable. Were they MTV viable? Were they accepted as MTV viable, or did they have to break into being MTV viable? Does that make sense? I guess I'm asking if MTV was receptive to the idea of 9 nutjobs playing death metal in masks.
They were once they got in. I don't know how long it took them to actually break in to get their first airplay on MTV. I know once they once they started getting played on MTV, they were on a lot. They were on a lot. They made great videos. That's one thing. So, they were selling records, right? They were selling albums. They had a cool look about them, but I also think they made really smart videos. And through their entire existence, they have made very intelligent, smart videos. And you can probably attribute a lot of that to Clown, who's sort of one of the creative directors, of the band when it comes to visuals. And it was a director, Paul Brown, who was very instrumental in creating the video looks for them. But yes, MTV was very receptive. Once Slipknot got in the door, they were in, and they were never kicked out.
You've just lassoed me down a rabbit hole, because I don't know this world very well. So what's so important about meaningful and clever videos? Because I know it, and I'd like the look of some of those videos, some of the early Slipknot videos, but I don't know what's important about them. So off you go.
Yeah, I just think, when the executives at MTV are watching hundreds of videos per week, you got to do something that stands out, that sticks out. And maybe it's a good song. Hopefully it's a good song, but also it has to be something that's visually interesting. One of the first bands to do this was Aha with Take On Me. That was a video that, drew the attention of the people at MTV at the time. Prodigy had a video called Smack My Bitch Up. That was another video. I remember people watching that video and going, oh my God, this is different. This is cool. I think Slipknot in some ways was very similar, that people saw the video work they were doing and they wanted to show it. It was almost like street cred for MTV by playing a cool looking video by Slipknot. So they were very smart with what they did visually, and that appealed to the people at MTV that were programming the channel. Because again, you don't want the same video over and over again. You want something that stands out amidst all the videos. Back then they played videos. now not so much. But back then you wanted something that stood out, and the Slipknot videos stood out. If, certainly because of the guys in the band, 9 guys in masks, but also they had smart looking videos with intelligent themes and very well shot, well done.
One thing you mentioned there was underground credibility, which I think is something that repeats in Roadrunner's tenure, even up to the end, because even as a non-strictly independent, when they teamed up with Warner and teamed up with Universal, there was still some underground credibility to what they were doing. And bigger businesses like the MTVs of the world latched onto that, I think. As a brand, I think that was always a good sign. They were a good thing to hook into, because it made other people look good when they tried to get some street level band, artist, or music or video or song or anything.
Absolutely. Yeah. Roadrunner, the name and the brand certainly had a certain connotation, and it was, cool underground metal. Yeah. So if you were playing a band that was on Roadrunner, most of the time, you absorbed some of that cool underground metal vibe, whether it's Headbangers Ball or Spring Break, for a half an hour during that one weekend, we had a sort of cool, Roadrunner metal vibe going on.
How long did the last guy last then? Because if he was...
it was ironic that Fear Factory played 3 songs, which is probably about 12, 13 minutes. It was the Obsolete album. So they played 3 songs, and about 13 minutes it took.
Right, with a band like, oh, for fuck's sake, could you not lasted longer, fellow, whatever your name is?
Right. Well, the show is supposed to be a half an hour as well, so a lot of things factored into how many songs Fear Factory was going to play and how long the rest of us were going to last. But yes, it was very ironic that it was 3 songs, 1 song per act, pretty much, and by the end, 1 guy was left standing.
What do you make of Nickelback then? Because while we're in this era, we're in 2001 approximately, aren't we? So
the 1 guy left standing, by the way, was Chris Jericho.
Right. Okay. That's a very male afternoon.
So it's appropriate.
Yeah.
Nickelback.
What's your take? You can do a personal take, and then you can, because I'm going to ask afterwards, how does MTV deal with sort of backlash? Because there's a big fan backlash around Nickelback, and there's always like a weird hate thing, which we could talk about, but I don't know how it fits into the video world. But tell me about your experience with this band.
When I left MTV at the end of 2007, beginning of 2008, I left to go to Roadrunner. And one of the guys, I remember telling me, he said, how long before you start drinking the Nickelback Kool-Aid? I said, what are you talking about? I didn't have anything against him. I didn't know the guys. Yeah, I knew some of the songs. But I tell you something, going to Roadrunner and working with them, number one, they're really nice guys. They honestly were one of the easiest bands to work with. Really, they were. You know, I had a lot of fun working with them, and it's sort of, to me, it was the same thing like when you had bands like, you know, Poison and Warrant writing these songs that were very hooky. You know, people said, they suck and there not metal, and they saw no value in it. For me, especially as I got older, and by the way, I said all those same things about those bands back in the day because I was into heavier stuff. I was not into Poison or Warrant. But as I got older, I appreciated those bands a lot more for their songwriting ability and just, you know, for the good times I had, you know, remembering being out at a club and they're playing the music and it was a good time. Mm-hmm. So in the same way, I think you can't deny that Nickelback, I mean, they write hooky songs. You know, you go to a Nickelback concert, and even if you're not that familiar with them, if they play 20 songs, you probably have 15 of them stuck in the back of your head. Mm-hmm. And you can vilify them for that, or you can say, damn, those motherfuckers write some really catchy songs. I choose the latter, okay? Yeah. And I also like that they blow shit up on stage. I also like that Chad can sing. I like that the band are you can argue with me, but they're good at playing their instruments. They play their instruments. They don't lip sync. You know, I like when they play an AC/DC cover or a Charlie Daniels Band cover. I like their choices when it comes to that. You know, so I don't have a lot of bad things to say about Nickelback. If people are going to crucify them because their lyrics aren't deep and have this, you know, deeper meaning, I get you. I understand. But like, you know, there are a lot of other bands that don't have deeper, you know, meanings behind their songs, you know? So
yeah, it's easy for me though, because it's really easy for me because Silver Side Up was one of the first CDs. I remember getting the bus into town and me and my mate put our money together and we got Silver Side Up and we got Tenacious D Wonder Boy, the single. And we played Red Faction for like 7 hours and it was ace. So I've got like, there's a nostalgia bug there. But I think when you were discussing this Nickelback as a love-hate thing, today is an interesting day to talk about it, as in these days, not today, there's no special day, because we're like, I call this the post-Last Jedi era, where people realize that like the overwhelming opinions on the internet no longer matter. Because like everyone will say they hate The Last Jedi, but if you talk to 100 people, 50 of them will say it's fucking brilliant. So it doesn't matter what all these people say. Similar with Nickelback. People are now sort of coming back onto Nickelback going, I never really disliked them.
The vocal minority, right? I mean, yeah. I don't know if it's cool. It's certainly easy, right? If you want to jump on the team and bash Nickelback. But like, you know, once you have so many people speaking out so aggressively and so against anything, it makes me think like, wait a second, why do they hate this so much? Yeah. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It's not worth the effort. And I think actually when we were at Roadrunner, I had spoken to Nickelback and said to them, like, you guys should do a documentary, or we should do a documentary. And you should show people the side of the band, you know, where Ryan Peake, you know, goes to Africa to help get clean water for kids in Africa that don't have clean drinking water. Like, you guys should show people what you do besides, you know, the music, you know, because then it's not just some person that you've never met, you don't know, and you don't care about that you're bashing. Kind of like the anonymity of the internet allows you to do that, right? Mm-hmm. Then you see the good that these guys do, you know, and then it humanizes them, and then it makes people think twice about like, okay, I may not like their music, but I can respect them as human beings for what they do. And I think people just take it to a level that's just unnecessary. And I don't understand why you would waste your time and energy. If you're not a fan of the band's music, all right, move on. You really need to sit there and bash them. And again, I would say I disagree. And as a thrash metal documentarian, this might be heresy. But like, listen, you know, I'm telling the truth. I think that they write songs that I appreciate. I understand where they're coming from. They put on a good show live. And end of story.
They've got Pantera's pyro guy, I think. Or at least they did.
I didn't know that. Then that explains some of it, because they have a great live show.
Yeah, I think I'm quite cynical about why people hate. I think it's a desperate pledge to be interesting, which that's a very cynical way of looking at it when people hate on. I think that's when people hate on anything, to be fair. But yeah, it's one thing I want Nickelback to do is the same as Metallica. I want them to do a tour, but I want them to go, we're going to cut the budget by 75% and we're going to do like smaller venues and we're just going to bash out these 75-minute sets. And it's just going to be fucking brilliant. Like, they've got the songs to stand it up. Like Coldplay did this. Now we're going way off. But Coldplay had one great album and the rest of their music was just, we'll put on a laser show at the gig and we'll just write a shit song that goes with it. Nickelback have great songs and great visuals. I'd like to see all the production stripped out and just hear the songs, just to sort of like, not because they have anything to prove, but because it would kick tits. Yeah. It's because they're kind of like especially the earlier stuff is sort of post-grunge, and then they're moving to what we'd regard as a contemporary space. And that contemporary stuff kicks ass in the clubs. And I'd love to hear it coming out of like an actual Les Paul on a stage in my face, not like 50 yards away in an arena.
But to your point, you were asking how did MTV deal with the backlash? I mean, MTV played bands if they were, doing well. And in the early 2000s, Nickelback, with How You Remind Me especially, I mean, it's still one of the biggest songs ever, So MTV had no qualms about playing Nickelback videos, for the years in the early 2000s, especially, when they were selling records and before any sort of backlash hit. They did not play them that much while I was at Roadrunner. I do remember VH1 had a top 20 countdown show, right? And VH1 basically, counted down the top 20 songs, the top 20 videos. So they sort of were beholden to play Nickelback, who would occasionally be in the top 20. So then you want to play their video. Sure. But at that point, MTV had sort of, stopped playing videos and certainly playing Nickelback videos, and VH1 took the mantle, with an older audience and a top 20 show. Yeah.
I mean, the Nickelback arc into Roadrunner's history is kind of, it's the 21st century arc of Roadrunner in general. Because it all happens in those like 2 years, in like 99 to 2001, you got Slipknot and you got Nickelback, and you've got the Universal purchase of however many shares or whatever. But you've got these massive fucking flagships. You've got these AAA artists, Nickelback and Slipknot, but Roadrunner is still doing this really cool underground shit. A lot of the stuff that fell off from like Ferret and Trustkill, like all the stuff which was incubated in those spaces in the indie kind of what we now call metalcore, maybe post-hardcore spaces, like the Kill Switches and the Triviums and the all the Remains and things like that. They ended up being the kings and the trendsetters. So when people say that Nickelback harmed Roadrunner's brand, it's like, well, in the same way that fucking Star Wars harmed Disney's brand, don't make any sense. You know what I mean?
No, it doesn't make any sense. I totally disagree, completely disagree. And if nothing else, Nickelback and Slipknot, they were the biggest bands on the label. To quote somebody at they kept the lights on. So. Really, without Nickelback and Slipknot and the bigger bands on the label, the smaller bands would have never had the opportunity to be on Roadrunner because there wouldn't have been any money or staff to support all these other bands. Right. So. We can have a whole separate Nickelback conversation.
I'm thinking of like, for the documentary, I'm thinking about just cutting it out, like, because like when I like to talk about the backlash, I link a lot of it with the fight I've been fighting for the past 4 years about The Last Jedi, the greatest Star Wars film ever made. And I'm like, this definitely ties in.
I don't know, maybe it's just me, but like when somebody hates on something so much, it actually kind of makes me gravitate to them more as to, like, right? Because, when punk rock and thrash metal came out, every person who used to love hard rock almost, a lot of people hated it, And that's one of the reasons I like thrash metal, because it wasn't easily accessible and it wasn't stuff that, other people liked. It wasn't like you could walk down the street and hear everybody playing thrash metal. No. I know it's totally different with Nickelback, but I don't know. There's that little piece of like, you guys hate them really that much? I got to check them out, You
got to support the underdog, haven't you?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk about your I like calling these things migrations. When you move from MTV over to Roadrunner.
Yeah. Basically, had a friend at Roadrunner who knew somebody at MTV. Actually, had a friend at MTV who knew somebody at Roadrunner. And they brought me in, and I sat down with Jonas, who was the head of the label, along with Madeline Scarpula, who was the head of marketing, and Dave Rath. Dave Rath, who was the head of A&R now.
Yes.
And we sat down and we spoke, and I remember them showing me, the Kill Switch Engage video for Holy Diver. And, I watched the video and they asked for my thoughts, and then they asked how much the video was. And I forget what it was, but I pretty much nailed it. And then they said, oh, we thought that this video, would look like it was twice as expensive. And, we thought that the, production company might be ripping us off. You're saying that? I said, no, what they delivered here, was a lot for the money. So that was my introduction to the Roadrunner world. We're looking to do videos. We're going to have to be, doing them on a budget, and we want them to look great. And that was my introduction to Roadrunner. I remember the first day I had started there. I had left MTV after years, and I got a call from a show called That Metal Show. It essentially was like a Headbangers Ball type show that was on VH1. And I knew the hosts of the show, and they called up and they said, you got to do the show. I said, I just started at Roadrunner. I just jumped out of the MTV circle, that little wheel I've been on forever. I can't leave them now. I can't leave them. Yeah. So I decided to stay at Roadrunner. And, the first couple of times I went out to see bands with the staff at Roadrunner, we went out to see Airborne, I remember, at a small club called Don Hills. And the staff is all there, like a big party, the band's playing, and it was their showcase for Roadrunner. And it was just like, being part of a gang, you were on the Roadrunner staff, but it was like a gang took over this bar, and, you're watching your band playing, and it's an open bar. And I was like, wow, this is a lot different than MTV, So
did you, that's one thing. Yeah, there's always like this, and it's much more of a deeper anecdote that people tend to give me. So I'm doing it injustice by saying it because I didn't work at Roadrunner, but the culture was so strong within the workforce that it became almost impossible to penetrate. So was there any point where you thought, I should have done that metal show? Or was it always fucking bleeding Roadrunner red, as they say?
Once I told that metal show that I couldn't do it, I pretty much moved on. And the thing is I had been at MTV at that point for a long time, for like 10, 12 years, 13 years maybe. And it was time for something new and a new challenge. And like I said, the people at Roadrunner were great, and to this day, just remembering the times working with everybody, it was some of the craziest times, some of the hardest work I've ever done, but some of the most rewarding. And that's what the people told me when I was taking a record label job. In fact, the person who interviewed me for that metal show, she had just come from like Sony. She was the head of marketing at Sony. Mm-hmm. And she said, you don't want to go to a label. Here's all the reasons why. And she was right. She was right. She was completely right. But still, it was like this beautiful, dysfunctional, but just amazing, like I said, it was like being a part of a gang, It was cool.
So what's your remit in your role is how are we phrasing it? Direct or head of video production?
I guess when I got there, they were calling me video commissioner. And I said, well, this sounds like something out of Batman. I'm the commissioner.
It sounds like the role comes with a hat.
Yeah, exactly. As a commissioner is not really what I do. It's kind of like the director of video production and the production and development. So that's kind of what my title became, or maybe I just started calling myself that. I don't know, but that's what's on my resume.
So what was your role there in terms of, was every video that was coming through, were you going, yep, sign the paperwork, sign the budget, yes, this meets the annual cycle, our quota for videos for the year? What's the gist? Basically,
the marketing department would have a budget for each album cycle for the band. They would determine what the first single is going to be and what the budget is for the video. They'd get together with me and the band and management and say, okay, the first video for, Black Stone Cherry has a budget of X amount of dollars, and here's the due date, here's the song, here are the lyrics, and this is kind of the vibe we're looking for. So I'd get on the phone with the guys in the band and management and say, what are you guys looking for? And do you have any directors in mind or production companies? And then I would kind of be the liaison between getting treatments in, basically directors and artists, production companies writing up an idea of what they thought this song should be, the video for the song should be.
Okay.
So I'd get all these creative concepts in, I'd read them all, and with the marketing people and Jonas, the president of Roadrunner, sort of vet them. And then we'd kind of go back to the band and say, here's, like 5 or 10 of our favorites. What do you think? And then with the band, I'd work together on what they liked, what they didn't like, and we'd eventually either pick something or we would come up with something completely different. And then we would schedule on a production schedule. The band's going to be in Kentucky with a day off on, this particular Thursday. That's when we have to shoot it. And then I got to find a crew in Kentucky that can pull this off and fly to Kentucky to make sure they are pulling it off.
This sounds remarkably familiar with a conversation we had earlier.
So that's how it went. Basically, I was given sort of marching orders. Here's the budget for this specific video. Here's the concept. Here's the due date. Make it happen. And it was like that for, documentaries, music videos, video shorts, anything basically video. That's how it worked. There would be the occasional artist that would come in and somebody would say, hey, we need a quick interview with, Michael from Opeth. Can you shoot something? So I would shoot and light it as well. Mm-hmm. So it was everything from DIY, shoot, light, and, sort of edit yourself to the big budgets where you were putting it all together and showing up and, overseeing the director and production company.
Is now a good time to ask, because you've given the marching orders, so your workflow has a lot of dependencies on it. It's production crew, it's the liaison for the production crew picking up his phone, it's the band turning up, it's all these things that have to happen. So is it a good time to ask about which was the worst and best experience?
The worst and best. Listen.
You can have that in the back of your mind, and I don't want to put you on the spot if it's too.
I mean, I could certainly tell you there was a bunch of directors that I loved working with. We talked earlier about Paul Brown, who was, worked with Slipknot and other bands as well. But I'll always remember him for the great stuff he did with Slipknot. So Paul Brown was great. Phil Mucci. Phil Mucci is somebody who did a great animated short that was won some film festivals. And then I decided that we got to get this guy on board, and he wound up doing the Korn video for Oildale, as well as an animated Stone Sour video, and some just amazing work. Phil Mucci does sick animated stuff as well as real life videos. And then Bill Fishman, who did a lot of videos with Theory of a Dead Man. Mm-hmm. He also, I believe, did Suicidal Tendencies Institutionalized. So he's always been a legend. He's always been a legend in my book, and he still is. But those are some of the directors that I loved working with. I don't think there was anybody that I hated working with. There certainly were some videos that were more difficult than others. I don't know if
you don't have to mention anyone if you don't want. This is an edited conversation.
I don't think anyone was so terrible that I would say I would never work with them again. Let's put it that way. Were there bands that took longer in the process? Yeah, I mean, listen, Airborne and Blackstone Cherry are bands that took longer to kind of go through the process. But I wouldn't say that they were more difficult in terms of Rick, you fucking suck, this video, blah, blah, blah. Nobody ever really was like that, which now that you mention it, looking back, is pretty remarkable.
You didn't do Running Wild by Airborne, the one with Lemmy. You did? Yes. So how did that, you just sort of go, right, lads, what do you want? And they went, yeah, well, fuck it.
That was one of the first videos. Dave Rath, said, I'm going to fly out to LA with you, and we're going to do this video. Actually, that's the first one that I did alone. Let me correct myself. Dave flew out for the one before that. So I was out there as an overnight shoot, and, all went according to plan. I actually was reading Lemmy's book, White Line Fever, in pre-production, to just get my head around Lemmy's story. Maybe if he wants to talk, we got something to talk about. And I read that he had on his rider before, I forget, it was a special performance, whether it was a video or something, on his rider it said, he needed a quart of Jack in his limo before, he had to have it, part of the deal. And then at the end of his story in his book, he laughed and said, the stupid guy, you should have never given it to me, because obviously I showed up hammered and I couldn't even deliver what I was supposed to deliver. So I said, oh man, what am I going to do? Because on the rider for the airborne video, Running Wild, Lemmy, limo, and, a quart of Jack. So I got on the quart of Jack, but I said, you know what? I'm going to hold on to it. He's got to actually come to set. It's not going to be in the limo. So he got out of the limo. He was pissed. I held it up and I said, Lemmy, I read your book. Do you understand why it's here and not in a limo? And he just smiled and he said, good job, mate. That's one of my favorite Roadrunner stories, and certainly Lemmy's story. I was like, I told him I couldn't put it in the limo because then you weren't going to be in the video. Plus, you were supposed to be driving a truck. So,
did you get a note from Dave from Wrath saying, "Well done, that's very tactical of you, mate."
That's it. I figured I'm either not going to be friends with Lemmy or I'm not going to have a job. I chose Roadrunner.
You mentioned Jonas in this process in terms of vetting the directors. I'm uncertain of his role as president, because I know in terms of corporate terminologies, there's CEO, there's CFO, there's COO, there's president, there's this, there's that, and that. Is Jonas getting his hands dirty in this process?
I don't know if he was getting his hands dirty. He wasn't in there fixing shots and stuff. I mean, he was sort of okaying the budget. He would have to okay the concept. He would have to sign off on everything. He certainly would look at all the cuts.
Right.
I mean, getting his hands dirty, I think to me that means he's actually like on the set or in the edits.
I think in my head, if he's got like a controlling influence over the video output, it feels like he's got a front-facing brand sort of oriented role where it's controlling how Roadrunner is going to present itself to the wider world. This is a big statement from that little tidbit of information you've given me, but I don't know the role of president changes in context. So I'm just trying to figure it out. I can see why he'd sign off budgets. I can see why he'd give a shit at shortlisting directors and seeing the shots. It's like, okay, there's an awareness here that I wasn't initially privy to.
Yeah, Jonas was, I would say, bigger picture. And in that sense, it was money. What's the budget? When is this due? Certainly, what's the single? He had to approve of that as well. What are we making a video for? What's the timeline? What's the marketing plan? So that was his main role. But certainly, if he saw a video that he thought was not appropriate for the band, he would say no. And listen, the very first video that we did was for Theory of a Dead Man, a video called So Happy. It was my first video. Dave Rath and I went out to Vancouver, and it essentially was Theory of a Dead Man playing on a roof, and helicopter flying around. Great idea. Fans were going to be rushing up the stairs trying to get to this performance on the roof. I still think it's a great idea. But I didn't know Theory of a Dead Man well enough, and Jonas was adamant that this is not who they are, And at the end of the day, part of it was the fact that we had a big rainstorm in Vancouver, which really limited what we were able to do in terms of shooting.
Right.
And also was Jonas saying, "Listen, this is not the vision I have or we should have for this band. Ixnay it." So my first video actually for Roadrunner that I did never actually aired anywhere.
Wow. How often did that happen?
It did not happen that often. I would say that only about 2 or 3 times in the 4 or 5 years I was there did that happen. And of course, the first one I was involved with, it happened.
Shit.
I blame Dave Rath for it. He was there.
Yeah.
It's totally not Dave Rath's fault.
But that's after the money's spent, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. So then the battle becomes sort of like, how much are you going to pay the production company versus how much did they not deliver on the concept, and how much are you going to withhold? That always was a little troublesome for me because my background is production. Yeah. So all these people in production I'm working with are people that most likely at some point I'm going to work with again, right? And Jim, if I'm telling you that I just borrowed $50 from you and I'm not going to give it back to you, you're probably never going to talk to me again. You're going to be upset.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah. So, that was sort of, that was one of the more difficult roles when we had to tell a production company, listen, this just did not work out. We're not going to go through with it. And that's, occasionally where Doug Keogh or Jonas would come in, they would make the final call financially.
I can't imagine having an argument with a production company saying, well, look, we had a concept and a vision, and yes, you filmed a video, but you did not deliver on the concept and vision. Therefore, we're enacting clause 6.3 and we're going to pay you 60% instead of the whole thing. That's like, to me, I'm walking into that room had to have that conversation. Must have been fucking terrible.
Yes, Jim, it could be very, very, very difficult. You mentioned before, were there bands that were difficult? Were there shoots that were difficult? That was the most difficult part of the job. And again, it only happened a handful of times. But to have to tell a company, listen, everybody here hates the video or the band hates the video, we're not moving forward. So we can't pay you 100%. That was tough.
Yeah. Fuck, man. Fuck. But back to how I'm perceiving Jonas's role in this, I can see why he wants to far everything, because he doesn't want to go, hang on, we're spending 150 grand on this baby band. That doesn't fit their incubation cycle. That doesn't fit how we as a company are going to see that band go through. We need that. We need 75 grand of that to do marketing for their album or whatever. I can see that being his role. But
yeah, I mean, Jonas was the guy that had to ultimately decide, what the marketing budget is and what the video budget is. And, looking forward, is this band gonna, produce enough financially to make it worth a while? Is their video going to be 150,000 or is it going to be 15,000?
Yeah. Okay. So what I've learned here is as part of the videos were managed on a band basis. It was down to their life cycle upon which a video would be either built or decided not to be built or whatever, depending on how much money was there. Cool. Because in my head, there was like that arm of the business in that way that they're going to represent themselves. You could go, okay, we did well last year. Slipknot and Nickelback put out an album last year. So we've got $7 million with which to produce videos, and that's on an annual basis. So by December 31st, Rick, you must have spent smack on 7 million. Otherwise, that's the target we want to hit. But no, it's done in a more flexible. Is it flexible? What's the word I'm looking for?
Well, it was by band and it was by album cycle. So if a band, that they had high hopes for, didn't deliver in terms of sales, if the sales weren't there for the first album cycle, certainly for the second album cycle, the marketing budget and then henceforth the video budget was going to be less. Yeah. So it was by band and by album cycle. And if the album had legs, if it had 3 singles or 4 or 5 singles, sometimes you can get 3 or 4 videos out of it. By the end, the 4th or 5th video might just be a live performance at a club, but that's it.
I said this to you a few weeks ago, didn't I? When it's like the 4th and 5th single is always UK tour footage, and there's the band in front of Big Ben, unaccountably every single fucking one.
Yeah. As the band on the tour bus, or the band walking down the street, or tuning up their instruments on a tour bus. That's the end of the album cycle, the video budget cycle.
It seems less restrictive, though, than my sort of model of how I'd budget for a video arm of the business. So you guys didn't have an in-house production team. You were outsourcing it depending on what the band's needs were on every basis, right?
Correct. Yes. There's the odd occasion where it'd be a simple interview. We did have a camera and a lighting and mics and stuff. So I could do something simple, but if we had a band playing somewhere, we needed a video done, we were going out of house.
How would you cost up differently? And this is very poignant for a documentary piece than a music video piece, because music video, all right, we're capturing 5 minutes of sexy footage. Documentary requires you to be in a certain place at a certain time, watching something unravel, usually the creation of an album or a tour cycle. Yeah. So how would that affect the budget? And I imagine you'll need more man days.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the times when we had a making of the album, we would hire somebody that the band was close to, somebody that was going to be with them anyway, that had some skills behind, really, if you could hit record, you're going to probably be okay. It was the access. If you were with Slipknot when they're recording their new album, that was access that few people had. So, fortunately, bands like Slipknot, had good video guys, and they had people around, and we would say, listen, you're going to be there anyway, working with the band. So how about you film X amount of days for us and come up with the making of the album? So if the album was being made over the course of, 3 or 4 months, we would just say, hey, here's what we have, just budget yourself, but here's the chunk of change we have for you to shoot and edit this thing. Mm-hmm. So it wasn't like we were paying them per day. It was kind of like per project. You can work on this for 5 days. If you think you're going to be able to tell the story, more likely you're probably going to need to work on this a little bit for the next 30 days or, every other day for the next 30 days. But, we need a making of the album. Mm-hmm. So that's how it would kind of roll out, just by a project basis.
With those making of the album stuff, those appeared a lot more frequently as that decade moved on. Would you be privy to the business decisioning around that? Was it just how Roadrunner liked to package their products in those days?
It was just seen as cool extra bonus content that you could put online, and then you can also put on like a special edition DVD down the road. Or, when we re-release the album with bonus footage. Because typically these guys that were close to the band would have a lot of extra stuff. They would deliver us, a couple of pieces about the making of the album, but on the cutting room floor would be all this extra stuff. So there was a lot of bang for the buck. Not only could you get your making of the album to promote the album, when the album cycle is done, then you can, re-release like a top shelf version with 2 extra tracks and a bunch of extra footage from the studio. So it served a lot of purposes. It was content that could really satisfy the person going out to buy the album the day it came out or the month before it came out. And on the back end, it could supply footage for somebody who maybe wants to go out and buy a special edition with tons of extra stuff.
And each iteration of that product is another line on blabbermouth.net, and it's another line on Ultimate Guitars, and another line on Metal Injection.
Yes.
So it's all, to me, it's all about the footprint. It's all about the fingerprints Roadrunner has on all our traffic through the internet and through life in general. Do you know how you mentioned earlier? There's a chunk of money we'll throw at you, someone who has access to the band, to film this thing. Do you remember what that usually would be around? I imagine it would scale up, but
I would love to sell you it's like 5 to 10 grand.
Right.
It depended on the band, because obviously the bigger bands had more money. It depended on the length that the person would be filming. Are they going on the road and doing a tour piece on the road, or are they going to just do like a making of the album and they'll be done in a couple of weeks? So I would say in the ballpark, probably 3,000 to 5,000 up to maybe 10, maybe 12, depending on the amount of content and the amount of time.
So it's definitely not chump change, but you're not buying a second music video effectively.
No, this was bang for the buck. It was relatively simple because it was DIY. It was one guy with a camera, guerrilla style. There's no beautiful big lighting setup. It's behind the scenes, one person, and trying to get as much content as possible.
Wow. Okay, so let's move into. In fact, is there any other stories that I'm missing here that I've not touched upon, which you might have been?
The Fear Factory and the Lemmy one are two of my favorites.
These don't surprise me one bit. So I want to start talking about the Warner years. Obviously, you were there during the Warner tenure, and I'll preface it with a disclaimer that I'm kind of aware that whenever I talk about this bit and this period, it sometimes comes across as I'm finding an antagonist and I'm painting an antagonist over there. But the reality is it's just business. And what happened in 2012 when a lot of people got let go, it's just the migration, the evolution of the business, for better or for worse. Mostly worse, but depends who you ask. But at the same time, Roadrunner is still there doing great stuff. But was there a point where you sort of thought, when you were going into the office, okay, something's changing here, something's amiss?
Yeah, I mean, when I was at MTV and Warner bought the stake in Roadrunner, I remember calling Aaliyah up, who was in marketing and one of my close friends there, and said, "Oh my God, are you okay?" He said, "Yeah, everything's okay. Nothing's changing. It's going to be okay." Then I got to Roadrunner and really never heard or anything from Warner. There was a certain point I don't remember when the human resources team and Warner started paying a little bit more attention. It's probably when Case sold his final stake. I don't know the exact details. You probably know more than me, but there was a point where Case basically sold. So that, Warner had was it 100%? It basically owned the company.
Yeah, there is like it's 50%, then 73%, then the rest. It's all over like a 4-year period that escapes me at the minute. But
there definitely was a time, probably in 2011, 2012, beginning of 2012, when we all of a sudden we were going up to Warner for meetings, and once a week the Warner human resources people would be down in the Roadrunner offices asking if we needed anything and how we could help and yada yada yada. Having been through like these layoffs before at MTV, like I knew the clock was ticking. As soon as Case sold, it was just a matter of time. So we could certainly see the writing on the wall. I was surprised that I lasted until the end of 2012, beginning of 2013. The sad thing is I think the saddest thing is really, I think everybody will acknowledge, when Monty Connor was let go, that was just the heart and soul of that company was just taken away. So to me, really, when Monty was let go, that was the end of Roadrunner as we know it. And I have people still at Roadrunner that are doing great things, and they're awesome at what they do. But that certainly is when things changed. To me, that was the end. Forget about changing. That was the end. But really in 2011, when the Warner human resources folks started showing up a little bit more often, and we were called up to the meetings. Oh, you're going to be part of the Warner meeting. You guys are part of the family. You were just wondering, The Sopranos, when each member of our smaller family is going to be whacked.
There's this just on the I want to tell you the exact inverse of that, what you just said there, in terms of, you're going to be part of the Warner family, come to the Warner meeting. Paolo D'Alessandro told me this when I spoke to him. Revert back to that, and a few people have reiterated it too. So Silver Side Up comes out. It comes out on 9/11. Times are just generally weird. Everything's weird. The feelings are weird because there's this massive success, but there's massive tragedy. There's massive sort of vibe. Case sends an email out company-wide. This is 2001, saying this basically to the tune of, and I don't know the words of this, but it's basically, this album is a hit. I don't care what the fuck you think about it. I don't care what you're doing right now. I want you to deliver this album. No ifs, no buts, no excuses. Just a proper rousing the troops shit. Anyway, it was Silver Side Up does what Silver Side Up does. And then one of the first Universal meetings, obviously they were bought by Universal in 2001. They either go up to this big sort of fancy, let's call it a hotel suite or something like that, and have this conference. And apparently Henk Hacker, who was in the German office, he had that email framed, and he went up to gave it to Case and read it out, but was he in this sort of really professional corporate setting, he was just this loud German screaming about rousing the troops about this fucking rock album. And apparently all the Universal guys who would have, be part of the Universal family were just what the fuck is going on? Why is there this fucking German screaming on the stage of this framed fucking email?
Yeah, listen, you didn't have somebody to go out with a rallying cry like that. There was nobody doing that at a certain point after Warner took over. I think, especially after Monty left, or Monty was let go, it was hard to get that rallying cry going in my mind, and that's how I remember it. We all were there. We did our jobs as best we could. I even remember Joe from Gojira, coming back to sit in what we call the creative department. It was myself, Leif Covington, and Gail. Gail was doing mainly the photo stuff and packaging album artwork, and Leif kind of was helping both us, Gail and I video, and Gail doing the creative packaging. And we remember Joe coming back there in our little area that was sort of separate from the rest of the company, and we said, we're so sorry about Monty, but we're huge fans, and if you ever just want to come here and just chill and hang out and talk creative stuff, video stuff, art stuff, packaging stuff, just come back here. Like, we usually don't talk about like the money and the marketing and the budget and the touring and stuff. So, and we have a nice couch. You can come and just lay on the couch, like a therapy session. So I always thought that was kind of nice. We were trying to somehow carry, you know, the mantle that Monty had by telling one of his bands, listen, it's going to be okay. We're here. We love you. Come back and hang out. Whatever you need, just let us know.
Yeah.
And then, you know, 6 months later, 7 months later, the three of us were gone. So
did they ever get heads or tails as to why you were let go? Is it just, did they say, we're just doing cutbacks, which is, I don't know the American process of getting sacked. I'm very familiar with the English version.
Basically, it was a corporate restructuring.
Okay.
So if I was the head of video production at Roadrunner, you had the head of video production at Warner Music Group, and there wasn't any real need for two of us. Although the person at the Warner Music Group would probably tell you, oh my God, now I got 30 extra bands I have to work with for video. I do need help. But in the corporate world, there's two people. They essentially have the same job title. Yeah. We only need one of them. So that's essentially what happened.
You should have stayed as the fucking commissioner, mate. You should have kept that on.
Yeah, right. I'm not the director. I'm the commissioner. but it's something, again, that wasn't unexpected. Was I disappointed? Like, you know, absolutely. But there definitely was a part of me that thought that this is the end anyway. And that after 4 years at Roadrunner, not only is the company changing so drastically that I won't recognize it, but I think it's time for me to go back and do TV, because I did not want to be a record label guy. You know, I didn't want to be the guy that could only do heavy metal videos and hard rock documentaries. I wanted to do television, films, and other stuff. Yeah. So for me, even though I was disappointed, it probably was good timing to get me back into what I usually do, TV production.
Cool. What is it? What are you doing now then?
These days, I'm working on true crime TV shows. So basically, it's like murder mystery type stuff. But for the past few years, 2017 to 2020, I was working on a show called Live PD. Live PD is essentially like a show called Cops. I don't know if you are familiar with the show Cops.
I've seen it referenced in The Simpsons enough.
Yeah, well, essentially, we would follow live on TV. 6 or 7 different police officers around on a Friday and Saturday night. And some nights nothing would happen. And other nights you'd have high-speed 100-mile-per-hour car chases and shootings and DWIs. And I was one of the producers that essentially watched the monitor. And then when something happened, would relay to the other directors and supervisors, like, there's something going on in Miami, you got to go here. And the director would say, we're going to Miami live. And so that actually at times was even crazier than Roadrunner, because it was live TV.
Yeah, live sure.
TV.
Wow. You know? You should have been working Sunday night, mate. You'd have seen them all coming outside my house.
At your house.
Yeah.
The next time we do the show, I'm going to pitch that one of the locations be your block.
Yeah. The roughest part of West Yorkshire.
And it's funny because in the world of like this live PD, this cop show, meeting up with my world of like television production and music videos, I always thought to myself, what if we were able to get like the new band we signed, Zakk Wylde's new band or new album coming out, right? And we knew exactly where the cops were going to be patrolling, and we just crank up the music and we throw a party, and there you go, free publicity. The cops come in and they arrest the singer, whoever it may be. I always have in my mind Zakk Wylde. I don't know why. Just the drinking and loud guitar. And
he's overdue being arrested, isn't he?
Yeah.
He's gone too long without.
I always thought it would be a genius marketing plan. You get street cred by being arrested. The album gets plugged. You hear a little bit of the music. It'd be great. Never happened. Couldn't pull it off.
Black Loci, I think, were they Roadrunner in Europe? They might have been. I
think they might have been in Europe. I'm not sure.
I'm not going to die on that hill.
Yes, neither will I.
All right, Rick, is there anything I've missed? I said it before.
So you nailed pretty much everything, you know?
I'm really glad that we talked, and secondly, we took the approach of, let's just start from here, and let's just meander, because I've learned a lot, and I'm probably going to come back round to you on a number of certain things.
Whatever you need, absolutely.